What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to basically give a masterclass about base building. And my understanding of base building is developing all the prerequisite qualities that allow you to perform at a high level later on. And I'm talking about general qualities. So we're talking about general physical preparation, and that's going to allow you to later peak much higher when you go into specialized forms of training. And that's why they say the bigger the base, the higher the peak. And just to give an example, like a lot of people follow me for kettlebell sport content. So you often see people who progress much faster in kettlebell sport than others. And more often than not, the reason behind the quick improvement is that they have some type of strong base behind them. To give you an example, one guy at my gym, he does long cycle with double 32s for 60 plus reps. And he's been training kettlebell sport for less than 2 years. But he has a very strong strength training and powerlifting background. And obviously some of that is also genetics. So the base or your baseline is dependent on your genetics and on your general development through training. Obviously we can't change our genetics, but we can build our base and develop those qualities through training. So that's the lever we're going to pull, right? And sometimes you see people who progress very quickly. They may not have a strength background, but they maybe run a 3-hour marathon, right? And of course that person is going to become better much quicker than a person who was completely sedentary before starting kettlebell sport training. And that applies to basically all types of athletics, because that's by definition general physical preparation, right? It's a general base that's going to allow you to perform better in across basically all athletic domains. So before we get started, I'm going to give you my pitch. If you want to learn in detail about this and also have like systemized programming that's really time tested, you can check out my hybrid starter pack ebook. It's really, in my opinion, some of the best work I've done, and I haven't been advertising it much, but it's really, really good. And now without further ado, let's get started with the actual video. So I divide your base into several different components. And the first one is the strength component. And by strength, I mean maximum strength or limit strength. Strength is defined as the ability to move against resistance, and maximum strength means move against the maximum possible resistance. So when we talk about some exercise, your maximum strength is the intensity you can perform exactly 1 rep at, right? And why do we focus on strength in our general preparation? Because it carries over to so many other things. Obviously, being strong is very useful in and of itself, right? Because if you think about maybe a wrestler, right? If you need to execute a throw and you're in some position of really bad leverage, but you have a lot of maximum strength, you can still execute the technique, right? But even when we're talking about power, when we're talking about endurance, when we're talking about other things, it's still better to be stronger than weaker. As they say, strength is never a weakness. So for example, power. What is power? Power is just strength expressed quickly, right? So moving against resistance, but quickly, explosively. And that's why strength is the foundation of power, because if you can't move against a given resistance at all, you're not going to be able to do it quickly. And on the other hand, if the resistance is light to you, you can move it quicker, much easier. Endurance, similar dynamics. If you have a higher level of strength, right? A certain intensity, a certain resistance below that is going to feel much lighter and is going to be much easier to move for a high number, for example, of repetitions. So there's going to be an indirect carryover to endurance. You're going to have a carryover to basic hypertrophy, right? To muscle growth, even if you're training for strength, because your body is going to adapt, and to build strength, there's going to be neurological adaptations, but there's also going to be tissue adaptations, right? You're going to grow muscle. Your tendons are going to get stronger. And we know that runners, for example, who strength train tend to become injured much less. So I think it's not controversial to say that strength is a very useful and important quality to develop. So let's talk about how we can do it in a most efficient manner. And in my opinion, the barbell is still the best, most efficient way to develop it. And there are multiple reasons for that. For one, you can really incrementally progress because it allows you to load so precisely. And you can also use very high absolute loads, and that allows you to really overload those fundamental movement patterns like squat, hinge, press, pull, etc. And in terms of exercises, all the basic exercises are good, and you can and should use like all the basics and rotate through them. But in terms of benchmark, I really favor the conventional deadlift. And the conventional deadlift is, for example, one of the best predictors of strongman performance. And we know that professional strongmen are, in terms of raw strength, the strongest humans alive. So if they really focus on the conventional deadlift, I think that tells us it's really useful as a benchmark to measure overall total body strength. And obviously also we need some form of press, like overhead press, etc. And in terms of rep ranges, there is no perfect rep range. Like in kettlebell sport, we even use like up to 100 reps or maybe even more. On barbell squats, deadlifts, we may do like 100 reps in 5 minutes. And also like a single rep, like in powerlifting, is going to make you stronger, and everything in between. So there is no one ideal rep range, but for general development purposes, I really favor a high set, low rep system. And that's something that's a little bit of a hack, a little bit of a secret, because I don't see a lot of people doing it, even though it's been around forever. One of the like all-time greatest, you could say, strongman, Doug Hepburn, used to have a high set, low rep system. So let's talk a little bit about that. So a classic set rep scheme would be doing, for example, 3 sets of 10 reps or 3 sets of 12 reps or 4 sets of 10 reps, right? So we have like a low to moderate number of sets, but we're doing medium to high number of reps. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That really works. But what if we inverted that, right? We invert the number of sets and reps, and instead of doing 3 sets of 10, we're doing 10 sets of 3. How would that change the outcome of the exercise and the effect we are getting? So for one, because we're using a lower number of reps per set, right? We can use a slightly higher weight, even though we're doing the same total number of reps. So we're doing the same total number of reps, but with a higher resistance. And that means we're going to get a better strength stimulus. And also because the number of reps per set is lower, that means the quality is going to be higher. We're going to perform each individual rep much more explosively. So it's also going to be better for power training. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that a bit later. And by that we can have a higher, like the same number of reps, but at a higher intensity, and that's going to be more mechanical stress. And that means we can build muscle just as well, but bias strength development a little bit more. And that's why it's really my favorite way of training for general purposes. And I'm not talking about like speed development in like the lower 30-40% range, right? In terms of percentage of your 1 rep max. No, I'm talking about 60+% 1RM, 70%, 80%, maybe a bit higher. So really that productive range of strength training. And what are some good systems you can use? You can do, for example, do 12 sets of 2 reps, right? You can do 8 or 10 sets of 3 reps. And obviously you want to like cycle through them in an intelligent manner. And the reason I really like that is because most like traditional quote unquote systems are a bit of a trade-off. For example, you have your classic powerlifting 3x3, right? You're going to do 3x3 at, I don't know, 90% of your 1RM. And that's going to build a lot of strength because the intensity is so high, but you're not going to build a ton of muscle because it's only 9 total reps, right? So the volume is low. And on the other hand, you maybe have your 4 sets of 10, right? So that's like 40 total reps. That's like really high volume, but the intensity is going to be lower. So the weight is going to be lower. So it's going to build muscle, but it's not going to build as much strength. And with the high sets, low rep system, you can really get the best of both worlds because you get a high number of total reps. So you get quite a bit of hypertrophy, but the intensity is also high. The quality of the reps is high. Each rep is performed explosively. So you're going to build a lot of strength and power as well. Okay. So, strength, we talked about that. The next quality for base building is really power. And power is basically just a combination of strength and speed, or strength applied quickly in an explosive manner. And there's something called the strength speed continuum. So if you imagine like maximum strength on one end and pure speed on the other hand, so basically training across the continuum is really going to make you more powerful. And there are many great methods to build power. There are like plyos, there are sprints, there's Olympic weightlifting. But now we're going to look at it from a like general perspective, and we're just going to sprinkle a bit of power training into our general preparation because like everything else would be more specific work. And the first one we kind of touched upon is compensatory acceleration. And that means we're going to, when we're doing our strength work, we're going to really accelerate and explode on each rep. And it's called compensatory acceleration, or CAT in short, because if you imagine like a regular repetition, you have like a sticking point where like the force curve of the exercise or the resistance curve of the exercise forces you to really apply a lot of force. And then you have like positions of better leverage where you basically can chill a little bit and slow down a little bit. For example, when you're doing a bench press, right, the hardest part is usually going to be at the chest, right? And then as you are going to lock it out, especially with submaximal loads, it's going to be easier and you can kind of coast a bit. And compensatory acceleration means we compensate for the improved leverage, because as we like get farther away from our chest, our leverages improve, right? And we get to a position of stronger like leverage, and we compensate for that by accelerating even more. So no matter the exercise, we're going to pull as explosively as possible from start to finish. And that's going to really engage our fast twitch muscle fibers, and we can kind of like get a secondary benefit of power development right from our strength training. And then we're going to sprinkle in some specific speed and power work. And the one thing we're going to add are going to be plyos or plyometrics once per week. And you can like get creative, but in my opinion, if you do your strength training and once per week you add like, for example, pogo jumps, right? And you do like 5 sets of 20 and do them like really like explosively, that's already going to give you like much of the benefit. So plyos, you can get creative, add other stuff, but like basic stuff once per week, that's kind of the minimum we're going to sprinkle in. And the other thing I would like you to sprinkle in into your base building are strides. And strides are like sprinting. A lot of influencers are talking about sprinting, and when you listen to what they actually do, they're not doing sprints, they're doing strides. And there's nothing wrong with that, because sprints are basically running a short distance at maximum intensities. So in track and field, usually we say up to 400 meters, we're talking about a sprint, right? And running that distance, like maybe 50 meters, 100 meters, maybe 400 meters even, as quickly as you can, that's a sprint, right? It's not necessarily top speed, because you only can hold top speed, like the maximum speed you can actually, like you're capable of, for a couple of seconds. So even elites during a 100-meter sprint, they slow down towards the end of it. So what are strides? Strides are basically sub-maximal sprints. Or if you like just go out, like do 6 sets of 10 seconds and running at maybe 80-90%. And that's strides. And the cool thing about strides is the risk of injury is very low, because really the risk of injury from sprints comes from like going really all out and putting as much force into the ground as you can with each step. So the risk of injury is really low, so it's beginner friendly, and it's easy to recover from. So the difference between 90% and 100% in a sprint is huge, and you may get really sore from like a hard sprint workout, but from doing strides where you like going at 70, 80, 90%, you won't even feel it the next day once you're used to it. And that's not to say don't do sprints, but that's to say you can get a lot of the benefits from just doing strides and doing that maybe once a week, right? And for example, you do 6 sets of 10 seconds and you basically just touch speed and then teach your nervous system like how it feels to like turn over the legs fast. So we have our strength training, and then we're going to add plyos once a week, and we're going to add strides once a week. And then we're basically done with the strength and power and speed component for base building purposes. And we're going to talk about our energy systems and our aerobic base. And in endurance training, the base is really what allows you to build a high level of endurance. And one way to think about it is capacity training versus utilization training. So usually in a peak, like a 12-week program where we really hit the interval work, right? We're working at really high intensities, high heart rates. We're basically realizing or learning to utilize the capacity we have built prior to that. But that's why you can't really progress just on high intensity training long term, because you're going to realize your potential for a couple weeks and months, and then you're going to kind of like get stuck. And that's why it's important to build that huge base in endurance training. And the only way to do that is by doing a lot of volume. And to do a lot of volume, you have to do what? You have to slow down, because it's like a prerequisite. Because they're like intensity and volume, there's an inverse correlation, right? Just like with strength training. So what we're going to use for that is cyclical work. Okay, and cyclical work means just the body's going through cycles of movement over and over again. There's cycling of tension and relaxation in the working muscles, and that allows the blood to flow freely, like circulation. That allows for unrestricted breathing, and that's really going to allow us to train our cardiovascular system. And you can use anything. You can use running, you can use rowing, you can use cycling, you can use the ski erg. Basically, every type of cardio is good. It's just important that the intensity is low enough so you can do a lot of volume and get those adaptations you're looking for. And in terms of heart rate zones, often people talk about zone 2 training, right? And that's basically up to nose breathing intensity. So when you get over the intensity where you have to start breathing through your mouth, that means you're going too quickly. But a lot of people don't realize that there's almost no too easy when it comes to base training. So you can use zone 1. I'm not going to get into the actual definitions now, but that would be like even easier. And even zone 0. Okay, and zone 0 would be basically like walking, okay? And you're going to get different adaptations from that, okay? And let's talk about the adaptations. So first off, you're going to improve your VO2 max long term, and a lot of people get kind of confused about that because they think only hard interval training improves your VO2 max. And yes, hard intervals improve your VO2 max, but it's kind of a short-term peaking protocol. But if you look at actual like data from the athletes with the highest VO2 max, it's the ones that do the most training volume. And there's actually been a study, a very recent one, that showed exactly that the people who trained the most amount of hours had the highest VO2 max. And why is that? Because with each heartbeat, the heart, right, the left ventricle of the heart pumps blood, and that's really the limiting factor, or like probably the main limiting factor for VO2 max. And the bigger the left ventricle of the heart, the more blood it can pump with one heartbeat, and that's called stroke volume. And the only way to improve the stroke volume is by stretching the heart over long periods of time. So that's why volume is the prerequisite. And we do that by working at those low intensities over a long period of time, because it doesn't take much for the heart to stretch maximally, right? Even if you work at an intensity of 120 beats per minute, which is very low, you are already at maximum stroke volume. So that's already enough to stretch the heart. So that's the first benefit we're going to get. Stroke volume, which is going to lead to a higher VO2 max down the road. Then you get like capillarization, which means basically just tiny blood vessels in the working muscles are going to get built. And that's going to allow, obviously, for better oxygen transfer to the working muscles. You're going to get mitochondrial biogenesis, which means building of new mitochondria, as we have learned in school. Mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, and there are many different mechanisms where they are crucial for endurance performance. And if you remember, I said zone zero training is also useful, right? Because zone zero is not a heart rate where we get really benefits in terms of stroke volume, right? If you're doing a brisk walk and you're very fit, your heart rate may not get over 90 or 100 beats per minute. So you're not going to get really that stretching of the heart, but you're going to get those other benefits, like you're going to build mitochondria if you go long enough, you're going to get the building of capillaries of the blood vessels, and also you're going to improve your fat oxidation, which also is going to confer a lot of metabolic benefits. Okay, so that's the third component of our base building approach, right? Is going to be the aerobic base building. And a starting point is really 3 hours per week. That's like really the starting point. If you're serious about base building, that's for like the bare minimum. And if you say, I'm not fit enough to do that, yes, you are if you go slow enough, if you just walk, for example. And then you really want to build it up to basically as much as you can tolerate and as much as you have time for. So to sum it up, to really build the base, right? Because you can like take a Honda Civic and put it on the road, and it's still a Honda Civic, no matter how good you are as a driver, right? So at some point you have to kind of upgrade, like maybe the engine and the wheels and everything, right? So we need to really develop the fundamental qualities, and we're going to do that by building our strength. I told you how I like to do that with high sets, low reps, like 12 by 2, 10 by 3, compensatory accelerations. We're going to build our power, and we're going to do that by including strides and including plyos into our program. And we're going to build our aerobic system with high volume aerobic training. And if you do that, like if you really commit to that process, you're going to build an amazing base that's going to serve you everywhere, no matter which direction you're going to do. And you can do that in the off season. You can also like combine that approach really well with like your specific training, because the aerobic training is by definition low intensity. So it should go well with other more intense forms of training. For example, if you do kettlebell sport training on one day, you can still do a 1 or 2 hour quick brisk walk on the next day, or do a 30 to 60 minute jog. It doesn't interfere. And you can also do, like, if you do, for example, 10 sets of 3 reps of deadlifts, it's not going to be so hard that it completely wipes you out. So you can still combine that with other training. And same with the plyos, same with the strides. So if you want, like I said, a really structured approach of how exactly I program that, check out my program, like the Hybrid Starter Pack. I really recommend it. I'm going to put the link in the description. If you have any questions or want to see any other topics addressed, let me know in the comments. Leave the video a like, build your base, and I'm going to see you next time. Take care, guys.